Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Darin Detwiler, and we are talking all things recalls. And in this short series, we're going to be talking with Vivien McCurdy. And there's so much to talk about in terms of her background and her perspective on recalls. Let's go ahead and just kind of first off, welcome, Vivien.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. It's always delighted to talk to you.
We've been talking about doing this for several weeks now, and it's great
Yeah.
that today we're finally able to do this. For those who might not have any idea who you are, will you talk a little bit about your background and your perspective that you're going to be sharing in regards to recalls today?
Yeah, of course. My name is Vivien, as you said, and my I spell as a Vivien, so it's a little bit different than the traditional one. So I'm a trained registered dietitian. So I work my first couple job. I work in nursing home as working with the dietary managers to do retail. And then I kind of got into the food system, sustainability, farm to table movement, food as medicines. And then at my last positions, I was with the state of Indiana Department of Health as the division director for the food protection program. So I dealt with a lot of regulatory issues, including working with anyone that produce food in the state of Indiana or importing food into Indiana. So I dealt with a lot of recall, outbreak, food injury issues, and so I kind of dabble a little bit about what does recall look like, how to work with the health department. So
When most people hear about a recall, it's on the television news or in the newspaper, if anyone reads those still. It's online or maybe even through like a viral video on TikTok or something on Facebook. And I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that, oh, this thing just happened. Like
mm,
we're finding out about it. It's brand new news right now, this hour or whatever, and it's a brand new thing. And I think that many audiences watching this will be kind of um, surprised to hear that it's most likely part of a process that had been going on for some time by people in capacities much like yours to get to that point. Once a recall is communicated, it's probably the tip of the iceberg in terms of the actions that have been going on behind the scenes.
absolutely, and many times when the news broke, literally, we already talked about it, dealt with it, work on the case. Probably sometimes even a couple months ahead of the time, um, when the first case reported, and then when we started to trace down what is the cause of the problem, what food was the suspected vehicle, and all those stuff. And then when the news broke, and was like, oh, okay, it's there. So I think a lot of people, and including the company on its own, right? So when the company, they got a phone call from the health department or from the health FDA, when they call and say, we call it the firm call, when we reach out to the company and say, hey, we noticed one of your product probably is the possible having causing some of the food injury or foodborne illnesses out in the marketplace. Um, and they say, what's going on? And then we kind of start to tell them and say, okay, this is the first case that we saw. It was like a month and a half ago. And then the second and the third case. And eventually we kind of build up to the point and we say, okay, we did our trace back, which means that we look at what where are the people, the illnesses um, show up. We did the epidemiology, food recall with them, with the patients, and say, what did you eat? And then we did the trace back where they purchased the food and then find the commonalities and then go back to the market, to the store where the food supply come from. And then once we done all those trace back, usually it take a good 2 or 3, 4 weeks sometimes in order to get to where by the time we're confident enough to reach out to the company and say, hey, we think your product is causing some of the food injury out there. So it took a while.
Well, I would imagine that you would tell your team, or your team would be told to
Mhm.
expect there to be denial, and that these companies would want proof, like that kind of, beyond the shadow of a doubt type, very clear proof that there's reason for you to be making this connection.
Yes, and honestly, every time when I have to make that phone call or when I'm on the call with other states with FDA, calling that company and say, "Hey, we think your company, the product, is the one that is the suspected vehicle that getting people sick." A lot of the time, it's a shock. There's a lot of emotions going through right away, as you say. Especially the one that um, especially the one they already did a lot of like good quality assurance inside their own company. They're doing a lot of good work preventing that, and that is the hardest part. And I will have people say, I actually went out a few times to the company to when we do the investigations, the foodborne illnesses investigations, the owners often share with us that they cry about it, they were shocked about it, they couldn't believe it. But I want to share one thing's really important is at that point when the company get the firm call, do know that right away the only thing that is a common goal between the company and the health department and the FDA is to remove the product from the marketplace so no more people will get sick. So put aside all the emotions. I know it's hard. Just know that, just keep in mind right away, the mission is to make sure no more people is going to get sick. And we're going to work together as a team to take the product out from the marketplace. And sometimes it's really is like someone give you an ingredients that you know make you to have a recall. Like think about the whole peanut butter outbreak, right? And then you trigger that, and there was a hundreds other products being recalled because of that. That emotion is frustrated. There's a lot of loss. Um, in many senses, and failure, people feeling failure, they failed the customers, they lost the trust, the reputations and all of stuff. But at that moment when we call, please do know that the health department, the FDA, all we want to do is to take the product off the market right away so no more people get sick. And that's the only reason we're there for together.
Well, it's very easy to imagine that there's an economic calculation that's
Oh,
going on. There's an economic tally that's going to be made, and you can look at uh, logistics. You could look at so many different parameters, but even legally speaking, I mean, I know that there's been examples of companies that decided to not take action, even though they were told that there was an issue they needed to conduct a recall, but they either stalled or they didn't do an adequate job, and that could just
mhm.
amount to not only more economic consequences, but also now legal consequences.
Absolutely. So when when companies decide not to do a recall or not do a good job to do a recall or try to recall as little as possible because of economic impact, that is when the state department or the FDA will step in, really work on the regulatory part and say, if you're not going to do it and we know there's product out there that's going to get people sick, we will be issuing a consumer advisory naming your company, naming the product by the health department, and will be sent it. And if it's a nationwide and FDA do the same thing, the reputation damage on that will be way worse than not doing the recall. Let's put it that way.
And you would rather have the company take ownership, take the
Exactly.
lead, take these actions, be the communicator, be the action taker, rather than by default now the government has to step in.
Absolutely. So if a company say we have a plan, we have a recall plan, we have some company even say we have the verbiages ready already, and they're going to do all those. We just kind of step back and just say, do what you have to do, and we're here to help. And then we will just make sure that we trickle down the message from us, to the local media, to our local health department, so they can go out to the retail store to make sure that the message being sent out to the consumers, or the retail store remove all the product out from the shelf and all those stuff. So we're really here to help. But if the company is not going to do that, it's can be pretty detrimental. Um, and I think, okay, edit this part out, but if I'm wrong, as I remember, the the pouches for the lead poisoning
Hmm.
pouches,
The
that was
applesauce.
the applesauce. I believe there was some concern about the companies not doing a good job, or have a hard time to get hold of the product, and end up a lot of health department have to issues, the state health department have to issues consumer advisory to the parents, to make sure that those products are, the publics are aware of there's something going on, but not coming from the company.
Well, there's always examples, when you look at the Peanut Corporation of America and how agencies were like, is their product being produced anywhere else? And the company was
Mhm.
saying no, but they were lying because there was another location. When
Mhm.
you look at the Family Dollar store with their Central Arkansas distribution center had the massive rodent problems, and
Yes.
the state health department was or agriculture department, the state's Department of Health or Agriculture, I can't remember which one, I was trying to work with them, and they weren't budging until they finally got the federal government involved. And those are just two examples. There's many examples. I remember over, I think 11 years ago, there was a recall of ground beef in Massachusetts, and the USDA notified the retailer, and the retailer's like, well, we don't have anyone complaining, so we're just going to continue to sell it. And they continue to sell it, and someone died as a result of them not, doing what was asked of them. So, and unfortunately, we live in times where, A, recalls, not that they're great, but recalls do happen. There are
Yes.
always going to be needs for recall, and we need to assume that it's very likely that at one point or another, you're going to be involved in a recall. What's not normal is when a company decides that they're not going to act upon it ethically, responsibly, legally, because, and this is what it typically rolls down to, greed. It's going to cost too much money to do this. It's going to result in a negative economic backlash. It's not always that they didn't know what to do. Sometimes they knew what to do, but they decided not to take action.
Well, and I think this has not been my experience, no, but I did talk to some other directors that I've worked with before from other states. The people just worry about liability. They don't want to admit fault, and then they're going to get sued after, or and then they just decide not to do it. And if you think about it and say, wow, you're really putting your company, not just your consumer, and your whole company at risk for not doing the right thing, when all the evidence or the traceback come to you, and we reach out as the health department, and you say, no, it's not me, I won't do anything about it. That you're actually putting yourself in more risk than just, oh my God, something happened with my product, let me do it right, and then add on it. And then one of the things I want to remind, that's one thing that I encountered before, is part of the FDA code about adulterated food. One of them is, if there's a place the product is prepared, packed, or held under insanitary conditions whereby it may have become contaminated with filth, or whereby it may have been rendered injurious to health, it is adulterated and is subject for recall. And a lot of people say, oh, well, I only have a mouse here and there. No, not if I come in as a health department and keep seeing mouse everywhere
Yeah.
for a year and a half. Think about Broad's head,
Right.
same thing.
Right.
So people have to understand when the health department and the FDA come and knock on the door and say, hey, we need to work together to make sure no more people get sick, work with us because it is in your interest and the public health interest to be this product to be removed. And things kind of can be sorted out after, but if all the epidemiology data is pointing to you, let's work together as a team.
So, A, we know it's bad if your legal counsel is advising you that, what are the chances, you know, um, act as if you're not going to get caught, or, it's only illegal until you get caught, right? There's all these loopholes or ways of thinking that could take place. But um, at the same time, for a perspective of, hey, we're always every time we put out a product, it's like every time you get behind the wheel, you need to think about
Mm-hmm.
putting your seatbelt on, or you need to think about your passenger safety. You need to think about the safety of other drivers on the road, right? You don't get to pick and choose. Today, I'm not going to worry about other drivers or my passengers, right? Same thing with the food company. Today, we're not going to worry about this. Today, we're not going to focus on this. You need to be always assuming and always acting in the best possible, whether it's sanitation, whether it's kill steps, whether it's allergens and so many different certifications. You
Mm-hmm.
always need to operate such that every product, every line, every day, every shift, whatever it is always operating such that there is an awareness that there is a possibility that there could be something that goes wrong. So let's do the best we can.
Absolutely. And sometimes, as you said earlier, and as your other guests have said it before, the food system is so complex right now with so many layers, so many people, ingredients coming from different places. And with the new technology, new science, sometimes they come together, didn't really achieve what we were thinking. And it happens. And when it happens, just come out and help the consumer make sure they're not going to get sick any further goes a lot longer way to gain the trust of your customers down the road. We understand, especially at the health department, and we see it so much more often than a company. Like we dealt with it almost on a monthly basis, and for a company to suddenly get a phone call from the health department and it's their first time, it is scary, but we have the experience and we're really here to help, and that is where the partnership really comes in handy. And whatever happened before, right now we have a crisis, and that's what the health department is trying to work on, is how we're going to stop that to get any worse. And as you say, the Massachusetts ground beef case, we don't want any more people get sick. um, and it is unfortunate when things happen. A lot of good company do good things and put in a lot of effort to it, and they have good plans. And when it happens, they can work, and we're there. We get it contained, and then we move on and try to figure out how to do root cause analysis after. But during the moment when you get a call from the health department, please do know that we have done a lot of investigation before we call you. And I also want to share a lot of times when things happen, when there's a product, when the product getting people sick, usually you will have a call with the federal government, which is the FDA, and the local health department together as a firm call and say, this is a problem we've seen across the country or in the state, but because your product crossed the state, and then we need to address the issues together. So it's even more freaky when you have two agency coming to your knocking on your door, but do know that we're here to work together.
Sure. Well, especially if that product is crossing a state line.
Mm-hmm.
Were you ever working with other states' agencies to,
Yes.
because it's the illnesses are in one state, but the product's coming from another state, and now you're dealing with other stakeholders that you don't normally deal with?
Yes, yes, we have that happens before. And then we will call the other state and say, hey, we know that the product is in your state. And that's usually when you get down to recall, all the state health department involved, they have the product in it. We're all together anyway on one phone call. So CDC determined there's a foodborne illnesses outbreak, FDA kind of guiding all the health department together, right? But there are times that we will have product that we know coming out from our states and have gone to another state, or something we tested have some bacteria in it or something, then we will call the other state and say, hey, some of our product is in your state. Can you please help us to take care of it? Take it out from the retailer or something like that. So we do work together among the states.
Do you recommend that food safety and quality assurance leaders, as well as, even food companies, legal counsel, um, be proactive and take the initiative to, be aware of and communicate with their state's health department, and not wait until they're literally forced to, the idea of having a good relationship, asking questions, things of that nature, being proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I know many states, we have what we call a task force meeting. So it's kind of like an emergency preparedness. So we bring all the stakeholders together and we invite the industry to come and talk about, when the emergency come, like how you guys deal with it. And we have people all the way from farm to table, producers there, kind of really talk about like their perspective when things happen. And the health department is the one that kind of drive it. Now, I have to say some of the state is not the health department, some of the state is with the Department of Agriculture. So the state that I was at in Indiana is with the health department. So
I just recently spoke at one out here in Los Angeles, and it was amazing, from restaurants to retailers to, stakeholders in between the two, and anywhere along the line with the food industry. And there were people who were there. Of course, I would be here, and at the same time, there's other people that were like, "I'm a little surprised that other companies aren't represented here. This is a great opportunity to learn and to meet, the network, and to make sure we're all on the same page, and to hear Dr. Detwiler speak, of course, I'm sure. But
of course.
um, it's amazing to me when you often hear about how there's an issue that happens, and now it's the first time that some of these companies are actually talking with the health department. There was an issue a while back where there was someone who was making some kind of condiment and had no idea what the state and even federal health department, or the state health department and the federal Department of Agriculture, the FDA, Food Drug Administration, had to do with, with regulating and selling this product. And it's like, how did you not know that these agencies played a role in this? Maybe if you were, um, you know either mentorship or partnerships, or just communicating and participating, you would have known that there's a little bit more to it than just make something and start selling it online. Um,
Well, and I think you kind of touch on food regulations. The past few years have changed a lot. It's no longer just like FDA is the one that like setting the rule and the state adopt it, right? Now we've seen a lot of the state kind of have their own special food regulations. California have their own rules about certain chemicals that you like food dye that you cannot use, or certain food labeling you have to require, those kind of things. So I think the good thing is to really understand what's your state or the state that you plan to sell to, the kind of regulations that they have. Because if you're from um, Michigan and you want to sell something to California, you really want to know, make sure that you comply with the law, the food law in California, so you will not have to have a recall by California because you violate the food labeling requirement that is specific for California. So that I think that's another topic for another day.
Right.
But when we talk about recall, as you say, sometimes it's just not just about like injury to health. It could be just like a labeling issues, and then you have to take everything back. So
Well, it also goes to what you had stated earlier in terms of that complexity of today's food landscape. In
mhm.
addition to the regulatory landscape, you've got two very complicated landscapes in a field of other landscapes. Retail is difficult, restaurants are difficult, and changing the consumer behavior, workforce needs and behavior, the economics of
Mhm.
it. There are so many different levels of things going on that it would make a lot of sense that regardless of how much change or how many levels of difficulty are piled upon each other, that the one foundational thing you work on is making sure that your food, your products are as safe as possible. And that if they're not, that you're able to take the actions that are needed to conduct a recall.
Yeah, and that's why we often say, the traceability rule is so important, because that is where you really can protect yourself, your company, because right away you know where your products go. Because the problem is when one of your product is happening, I don't know, let's say a an ice cream, one of your ice cream is having problem. If you have a good traceability rule or traceability method going on, you can zoom in which lot of the ice cream from where. Then you don't have to take back all the vanilla ice cream, right? You can just trace back to exactly the lot that is having problem, and the economic damage is a lot less. And then you'd be so much faster too. You can call exactly whatever the grocery store that you send to and say, hey, pull all those back, send it back to me, or dispose it or something. That is just so much faster and more effective actually than calling all the grocery store chain and say all the vanilla ice cream need to come back because we have problem with a few somewhere out there,
Yeah.
few lots that's getting people sick. So that's why the traceability is so important.
But we also live in a world where someone could get an ice cream at the airport in Los Angeles. The ice cream actually came from Texas.
Yes.
And then they have the ice cream there at LAX in Los Angeles, and then they fly out to Milwaukee or something like that. And
Mhm.
that's when the symptoms start to show. And now people in Wisconsin health department are trying to figure out, where is this illness coming from and figure out, who's sick and then what is it that they ate. And then, okay, this ties back to this ice cream. And then, okay, well, that came from this is one of the reasons why when you finally hear that there's a recall being announced, and then you're shocked that it's been something where it's been, 6 to 8 weeks since symptoms first
Mhm.
appeared, that's because it's so complicated that it takes that time to do that.
Absolutely,
Do that
absolutely.
work.
Yeah. And there's one and another things that, when the health department or FDA call and say something's up, we need you to do a recall. Um, as the company, they need to tell us how are they going to do it. Like we cannot do it for them, they, because we don't have the detail, we don't have the client list, right? Like we will have to say who are your clients, and then before you know, we thought they're going to sell in only one state, and then before we know, there's like many other states have purchased their product, and some of them is in the freezer at someone's basement or in the school's freezer or something like that. And then that is when you get really complex. And so as a company, the better you can prepare for your recall, how you're going to do it, and how you're going to assess what to recall, and not to do too much damage to your own financial baseline is better. And that require a lot of preparedness, a lot of discussions, talking with the CEO, CFO, the risk assessments and all those stuff. And one thing I want to say is a lot of people, not in the public's eye, when a company is done with a recall, when the product is pulled out, a lot of the time that the health department or the FDA will continue to work with the company to figure out what have gone wrong. That's what we call the root cause analysis, and see how we can prevent it to happen again, right? And until the problem was solved. So let's say if the company have a fail steps, fail HACCP plan is not good enough to prevent certain kind of bacterial growth in the product in the ice cream. Unless that product is solved, we will continue to work with the company post recall to make sure that things continues to be safe. So that's one thing that a lot of companies are not aware of, like the health department and FDA are not done just because the recall is done.
Vivien, thanks. We're going to come back in our second episode. We're going to talk about what the health department is doing after a recall has been called, or after it maybe even be declared to be over. And we'll be right back.